No one should go out of their way to look for martyrdom, but Jesus did say that to follow him means embracing the cross. However, little did a group of 18th century French nuns know that their commitment to follow Christ would be considered a crime. They sang their way to the scaffold. That's the way the martyrdom of the Carmelite nuns of Compiègne is described. Their only crime being nuns during the French Revolution. But before we learn more about those Carmelites, let's learn a bit about all Carmelites. The Carmelites are a religious order founded around the 12th century on Mount Carmel. The charism of the Carmelite order is contemplative prayer, and they find their inspiration in the prophet Elijah and in the Blessed Virgin Mary. There are Carmelite friars and there are Carmelite nuns. In the middle of the 16th century, a reformation of the Carmelite order was carried out by St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, who established the Discalced Carmelites. Other Carmelites who are well known are St. Therese of Lisieux and St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And joining me now in studio to tell us more about the Carmelites are Father John J. Comerford and Sister Agnes Roger. Welcome, both of you. I think that most people, when they think of Carmelites, they think cloistered and they think discalced, but neither of you are either cloistered or discalced. So what's the difference, Sister Agnes?
Well, actually, there are two Carmelite orders.
Okay.
One is called the Ancient Order of Observance, and the other one is called the Discalced Carmelites or the Theresian Reform.
So that was the reform that St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross
And actually, I do
established.
belong to the Discalced Carmelites.
But you're wearing shoes, so doesn't
I know because I had to walk here.
So discalced, but discalced literally means
Shoeless.
shoeless because they were shoeless?
Shoeless or sandals.
And is that because, but they were cloistered and shoeless?
Yeah. It was supposed to be a more extreme form of poverty.
And okay, so, and of those two orders, see now I'm confused, of those two orders, they were both cloistered originally?
No, the men's order never has been cloistered, am I correct?
Right.
Okay.
The women's order, what's called the Second Order of Nuns, are cloistered Carmelites.
Uh-huh.
But then gradually there became what we call Third Order Carmelites, which are Carmelites that have some of the cloistered life, but also have an active apostolate as well.
So when did the sisters, the Second Order, begin? Was that something that came later when the congregation moved to Europe?
Yes.
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 Several centuries later, Blessed John Sorth is the one responsible for founding the Carmelite Sisters, the first community of nuns.
And the sisters were also mendicant originally, or did they?
No, the sisters
No.
were originally were cloistered, and they had to, usually they had a sustainable lifestyle with large gardens, grow their own food, but they also had to have some sort of apostolate that they could do within their own convents, like making altar breads or making vestments or making cards to sell or selling their preserves. They have to earn their bread as well.
Right. Now, and sorry, just to go back, because I'm still sort of, being contemplative is the same as being hermetical? Or like, is there a, what's the relationship there?
Well, hermetical, we started out being hermetical, so we were individual cells within an enclosure and came together for meetings and prayer and meals.
Okay.
And so we weren't exclusively
Hermits in the sense of being
extreme. And we were always kind of in the middle, if you will. But then when we came to Europe, then we became friars like the other communities because we could no longer live as hermits.
Living in monasteries.
Right.
Or
But we were in cities, as where most of the Benedictine abbeys were out in the country.
Okay.
And so we were in the cities, so we began teaching at the great universities in the Middle Ages, as well as staffing parishes, hospitals, and so on.
Okay.
So we'd balance an active life with a contemplative spirit.
Okay. Now, I think another aspect of the Carmelite that people think about is the structured life. That we, first of all, that it's silent or quiet, or there's quiet time when you pray 7 times a day or however many times a day, and there's work time and recreational time and time in your cell alone. When you're active or out in the world, do you still follow, Sister, the same structure?
Pretty much. And actually, when you're talking about the contemplative, part of the Carmelite rule says to stay in your cell day and night, contemplating on the law of the Lord. But the idea of the cell is your human heart. So wherever we go, we carry the tradition of the indwelling of the Blessed Trinity within.
Okay.
So you can be a contemplative wherever you go.
We also added to that, because the rule says, in your cell, meditating in the law of the Lord day and night, unless occupied by some other useful activity,
Right.
such as running a parish, running a high school, going to dances, taking care of the yearbook, going to play practice. All the ministry comes under that,
But
unless
I think that would be difficult. I mean, and you just said, you probably listed a whole bunch of things that you were doing, running a parish, being a teacher.
Yeah.
How do you fit in that structured prayer life, that contemplative spirituality, if you're so busy?
well,
It takes practice.
It takes practice. That's right. Because our communities would generally pray in the morning, and we'd pray in the afternoon.
So
or
you come
evening.
together as community,
Yeah,
and then
we
everybody.
usually had community mass. If we weren't saying mass in a parish or mass out someplace,
Okay.
we had community mass, usually in the afternoons,
Okay.
most often.
So why did the Carmelite order need reforming in the 16th century? What was going on there?
That's it. Well, what happened is many of the orders at the time were very much influenced by the popular culture outside. And so things were watered down to such a point where you couldn't say they were really living the way they were supposed to be living. And so Teresa and John wanted to call them back to the simplicity of the original rule on Mount Carmel.
Okay, and you're smiling.
Oh, well, I guess. Because I belong to the Reformed Carmelites, so therefore.
Right. But is there such a thing as a non-Reformed Carmelites today?
Sure.
Well, the ancient order, the order that chose not to follow the Reformation, is still alive and well and flourishing.
So that's when you said that there are two different orders.
That's right.
I'm a Carmelite of the ancient observance.
But you're not Reformed. Do you know what I mean? Like if the
Right.
Reformation meant going back to the original
Yeah.
roots.
We are the original root. So,
Okay.
but we will joke about it now. I mean, there's all sorts of arguments of history. We were the Carmelites who threw John of the Cross into the cell in Toledo.
Yes,
and
that's
when-
right, because he was.
Our former provincial used to say, yes, we gave him a sabbatical so he could finish writing his poetry.
Right, that's right.
That's the way we would interpret it today.
So would you say that okay, so no, you have answered my question because I was going to ask you. So then the non-cloistered men who were never cloistered today are closer to those original Carmelites of the Holy Land
Right.
in the 12th century.
Especially when we moved to Europe.
Okay, so we mentioned earlier that there's some famous Carmelites. There's St. Teresa of Avila, who we mentioned, and St. John of the Cross, and then there's St. Teresa of Lisieux, all three who are doctors of the church. And then there's St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, who was a Jew. She was born Edith Stein, converted to Catholicism, became a Carmelite nun, and was killed at Auschwitz. And then there's the story of the Carmelite nuns of Compiègne, who were sent to the guillotine in the year 1794 during the French Revolution. Now, in 1956, French composer Francis Poulenc wrote an opera based on the screenplay by Georges Bernanos called The Last on the Scaffold. And the story is based on the historical events at the monastery of the Carmelites in Compiègne. And Poulenc's opera is titled Dialogue des Carmélites. And recently, I had the chance to visit the Canadian Opera Company as they were preparing for their opening night.
People think probably that opera is very big and with big costumes and very intense singer, but here it's completely the opposite. It's very simple but so powerful in that simplicity. It's like a little movie. There is short scenes and we are talking to each other, but sometimes it's hard because we are not really involved in the talking. But my character, She have two big dialogues with Blanche, the main character. And I think we are really in relationship. Circonstance is the little light and joy in everything. But I have to say she have deep, also very deep feelings, and she care about others. But she's very naive, and she's different. She has visions, and she's seeing the end of the story. She's seeing Blanche dying with her at the same day, and she's telling her very naive, yeah, I know, I made a dream and we will die together the same day. And Blanche, she's full of fears. She's just so scared. And I said, oh, but I don't know when, I don't know, but I know that it will happen. And it's happening at the end of the opera.
I would say this opera is about a certain form of dedication, a certain form of devotion. This opera treats for sure all the possibilities of communication between human beings. I would say there is a simplicity in this music that is striking. There is a certain form of evenness, or it's maybe the monotony of something like a meditation, you know, and that draws you really into it. And I mean, as we know, if we want to get close to something we call God, we might have to take a step back. We might have to kind of calm down. We might have to be extremely simple and receptive. This music connects with the deepest emotions we have. And I think emotions we probably all, to a certain degree, went through. Emotions we know. I really hope that the audience will be, first of all, touched. There is sort of an intellectual experience to make, but even more important, there is kind of a spiritual experience to make, an emotional experience to make in that piece.
I think everybody who are believing or not can be touched and can be involved in this opera. We have all fears inside. We are scared about death. I don't know anybody who is not scared at all about death. So it's the main thing here. In my character, I think she don't have this. She believes so much, and she's just living her life and be good, and she's so naive, but in a good way. She's completely there, and she's completely believe in God, and she's just a servant. And I'm sure there is nuns and priests, and they are there to live this life. I'm sure some have they are scared of death, like we are all human.
We know from history books that the crowds were there, and they were infuriated. And then, on the other hand, when the nuns came and they actually sang this Salve Regina, those crowds got silent because they were so amazed that those nuns were so courageous and so faithful. And they seem not to have any fear of what's coming. They made this le vœu du martyr. They made this vow, and they stick to it.
Now, I know, Sister Agnes, you were involved in one of the productions, in fact, here in Toronto, of the Canadian Opera Company. And Father Jay, you've had the chance to teach, when you were a teacher, a course on women of faith, women in faith, and you focused particularly on this story. So I'm curious to know, and I'll start with Sister Agnes, maybe about your involvement and what that entailed.
Well, I just got a call out of the blue from the Canadian Opera Company. Would I become a technical advisor? So I said, oh yes, of course. And then after that, what did I get myself in for? What did I do? But anyway, I went to see Lotfi Mansouri, the director, and I had in my pocket all the Carmelites of Niagara Falls. I had their number in my pocket. I'm going to give it to him. But I was the first person he ever met who had read the novel.
Okay.
And I knew about the history, of course. So we went back and forth. It was a great interview. And when I wanted to tell him about the Carmelites in Niagara Falls, he said, oh, no. He said, I want you.
Right.
So, and I
So
said,
they wanted you to advise them in terms of...
yes, it was going to be televised by CBC, so he wanted it to be like
Okay.
authentic.
So in terms of authentic, in terms of dress, in terms of...
Well, I said to him, I don't know what I could do that will help you. He said, oh, you'll know. And there were 7 things in the opera that needed to be changed.
Like what?
Well, first of all, when with the beginning of the opera, they brought the whole cast through the courtyard, kind of an introductory thing. But they were like marching along like this and looking around. And I said, Carmelites would never have walked through the quadrangle like that. And I showed them how they would walk.
I see.
And
How
then,
their hands would be folded onto the scaffold.
exactly, and their
Right.
heads bowed and so forth. And so,
Right.
and then also they were wearing high heels for their rehearsals.
Really?
You walk differently when you wear sandals, so
Absolutely.
they had to do that. And another one was where Constance and Blanche are having their dialogue.
Yeah.
They were like pawing at each other. I said, no, they
Touching
wouldn't
each
have been
other?
touching each
They
other.
wouldn't touch each
So
other.
various little things like that. There were 7 things in all.
Right. So Father Jay, how important would it be for a production like Dialogue des Carmélites to get it right in terms of, I guess, those detail, but also historically?
Well, I think it would do a disservice to the story if you had things that were incongruous, you know, whether it was gestures or movements, because it would tend to go, it would kind of go ding, 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 go off like something's not quite right about this.
Right.
And that would take away from the reality and the impact of the story on people who are seeing it.
No, but I've heard, well, and we heard that the opera is based on the true story of the martyrdom of these women, but it's not exactly the same story.
Not totally, no,
No.
not totally.
There are some changes which often
And
are
they're
done
made-up
for-
characters, of
for-
course, yeah.
Yeah, for dramatic purposes. The biggest one is in the final scene, they reverse the order of death. In reality, the youngest died first, and the superior died last.
last.
Right.
Mother Teresa saw her whole community die, and then she came up to the edge of the railing and said, love can conquer everything.
So can you just back up, because that, I know in the opera that is the most profound and maybe impacting scene, but it sounds like in real life it also was impactful.
Oh, yes.
So what happened?
Well, they, one by one, the sisters walked to the superior. They held a small statue of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. They renewed their vows and asked for permission to die.
To the prioress.
Yes. And then they turned, their hands were tied behind their backs, and one by one, while they were all singing, they went to the blade. Sometimes the sisters would help some of the sisters with difficulty walking to walk to the guillotine.
And this was a public execution. What was the response of the crowd?
Absolute silence.
No
Usually-
drum roll.
No drum roll. Usually they'd be throwing fruit and yelling. Not absolute silence, and it was as if the crowd came to the point of realizing now it's all gone too far, and people were so moved, and it's like, why would they consider these sisters a threat? You know, and then the superior went last. In actuality.
In actuality.
Yeah.
And a week later.
A week later, Robespierre died on the same guillotine a week later.
So the French Revolution was
Was
over.
over.
The reign of terror was over. Their prayer and offering
That's what people say.
was accepted.
It just occurred to me, I mean, when we were speaking, and you have St. John of the Cross, and we have St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, and I don't want to say that this is, I mean, the opera is not necessarily a Carmelite story. It might not necessarily even be a Catholic story. There's some universality about the story. But what is it about this, if I can say it, Carmelite spirituality that invites us to embrace the cross, that would have maybe empowered these women to face their destiny as almost like a bride going to her wedding night? What is that about the Carmelite spirituality
Take
system?
that first.
Well, to start with, first of all, they didn't sort of do it like all together, if you will. The prioress herself felt called to make the offering, and the others gradually came on board. It wasn't, so in other words, it's kind of like a dawning awareness that they were called to sacrifice themselves.
Right.
And I think it's partly this whole inner life of the Carmelite that gives you this sense of peace. And so when trouble comes, as it does, there's that sort of wellspring to draw on that allows you to go through these things
Right.
with some kind of courage.
Yeah.
We were founded by knight crusaders who went to fight in the Holy Land and then chose to remain in the Holy Land near the places where Jesus suffered and died, to live their life close to him. And so that feeds in very much into the sense of closeness to the cross, being part of our spirituality. They could have chosen to go back to Europe, but they decided to live on Mount Carmel, took Elijah the prophet as their hero, and devoted themselves to Our Lady, and decided to stay there in order to live a life close to the places made holy by the life and death of Jesus.
So if you could maybe just to conclude, the story of these courageous women, what should we take, whether we go to the opera or read the book or just hear the story from you? What do I take from the story? What is the message or the witness?
That might take a whole day to answer the question.
In one sentence or less.
I know for myself that it was the first opera I ever went to, but it was very, very profound. It kind of does something to the inside of you. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but you do, you don't watch this opera and come away the same. It does something.
Yeah, I think that for the person watching the opera today, seeing what these women were willing to do because of their commitment and their faith, what it says to us is that you and I might not have to face the same challenge of dying for our faith, but every day we have the challenge of living it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much both for sharing a little bit of this with us. It's a wonderful story. I'm looking forward to reading the book, actually. I'm going to borrow it from you, sister.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking about Carmelite spirituality, and in particular about the opera, Dialogue des Carmelites, with Father J. Comerford. He's with the Carmelites in Niagara Falls. You can find them at carmelniagara.com. And with him is Sister Agnes Roger. She's a Carmelite of the Divine Heart of Jesus in Canada, and you can find them at CarmelitesSistersDCJ.ca. And Sister Agnes is the Vocations Director, so if you have any questions, you can look her up. So we have been, as I said, speaking about Carmelite spirituality, and in particular about facing death for our beliefs. So if you have any comments about what we've been speaking about today, or to comment on anything that you hear on this program, send us an email, focus@saltandlighttv.org, or contact us via Facebook. So that's all for today. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Focus.